Hi. Good morning, and welcome to Ask the Expert from BC Training. Today's subject is BCM exercises and is with industry expert Ewan Donald. He is an associate member of the Business Continuity Institute and has been working within business continuity management, specifically as a response manager at an incident response center, a senior consultant, and a BCM trainer for over 5 years. Many of you have emailed in your questions into us already, so I've passed these on to Ewan. Thanks for this. If you have any questions during the webinar that you'd like answered, if you just use the question panel, and Becca, who is on call at the minute on the other line, she will be fielding out the questions through to Ewan. So if you just ask them in the question panel. The webinar will last a maximum of an hour, and later on today we'll email a copy of the webinar to you. Next webinar will be in approximately 4 weeks' time. Full details will be released shortly. Before I pass you over to Ewan, I've just thought it would be nice to welcome a few familiar faces, names at least. Tim, Shane, Mark, Chris. It's nice to welcome some of our customers in there as well, customers and faces of people that we've met out on the road. So, welcome. Today, we're covering BCM exercises. Ewan is a panelist, so I'm going to pass you over to him. Okay, Ewan, over to you.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Lachlan. I hope all of you can see my screen now. As Lachlan said, what we're going to talk about today is BC exercises. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is just give you an overview of how the session is going to run. As Lachlan said, this is based on some of the questions that were put in to us in advance, so thanks very much for submitting those. I'd just like to emphasize, if you have any questions as we go through, please do raise them in the questions panel, and those will get put through to me. If it's anything that's clarifying a point that I've been talking about, then I'll try and cover it as we go along. Otherwise, we should have some time at the end where I can come to any new questions that have been submitted. Just briefly before we begin, I know Lachlan mentioned my background. As he said, I'm a senior consultant at the moment with Plan B Consulting, and that's really my day-to-day role, is delivering consultancy training and exercises for a whole range of clients. And one of my real focuses in the job is on BC exercising. My previous role managing an incident response centre up in Aberdeen for the oil and gas industry primarily, was all about testing different incident management teams. So we ran several exercises every week for various clients. So I've got some experience in looking at different ways of exercising. So hopefully I'll be able to share some insight for you today. Okay, so just to cover off the agenda of what we're going to go through, and as I say, these are all based on the questions that came into us. So first of all, we're going to look at remote exercises. So that's conducting exercises when either the facilitator or the participants are in remote locations, and we'll cover some tips and some different ideas, hopefully, that you might be able to utilize yourselves that have worked for us. We'll then look at ways of exercising interdependencies within teams. So when you have several different teams who are providing different functions and need to work together, how can we develop an exercise program for that? Thirdly, we'll look at writing exercise objectives, and I think this is something that sometimes we may be guilty of paying lip service to, but there's maybe not a methodology behind it for how to write strong objectives. So we'll look at how I've done that in the past, and hopefully give you some good ideas to use going forward. At the end there, we will wrap up with some final points. And as I say, hopefully we'll have enough time at the end to cover any questions that do come in. So please, if anything springs to mind as we go through this, then please do let me know. Okay, so just go into the first question here, which is coming from Mark Cadman. So thanks for submitting this, Mark. Apologies, I have paraphrased some of these if they're a bit longer, but I hope we get to the core of what you were looking for. So we, like many others, are increasingly having to conduct exercises remotely. This means we have to focus more on desktop walkthroughs rather than simulations, as we are not on location to directly observe what the team are doing. Do you have any tips or suggestions on how the exercises can be made more interactive so that the team and the plan are adequately challenged while still allowing for the exercise to be conducted remotely by telephone? We have just introduced polls into our remote exercise sessions with some success, but what else could we do? So thanks again for that question, Mark. I think it's a good one, and it's one that we as consultants are being asked more and more often. How can we make sure that our exercises better reflect the business necessities or business practices? So we have more and more people working remotely, so we need to think about how we can fit our exercises around that. So I think the first point to say is that you're really doing the right thing, I think, here. There's a lot of people tend to hold exercises still around the table or in a room when that's not how they would do it in reality. So I think the first thing is that you're doing the right thing. And what we have to bear in mind if you're holding remote exercises, and I'm sure you'll have experienced this, is that online is a different dynamic. You know, in the same way that me sitting here delivering a webinar is different to if I was in a room with you all, and I could scribble things up on the board and I could look you in the eye, and it aids your understanding. So we have lots of tools that we can use. There's things like Link, WebEx, BlueJeans is one that we use, webinar tools like this. So there are a lot of tools out there that can add to the quality of how we deliver these exercises. But as I say, we need to bear in mind that holding them online is a different dynamic, or remotely through the telephone, as you said, Mark. And I think we need to be not tied to traditional methods if that's not how the business would operate in reality. As Mark's mentioned, there is also other time constraints, other challenges. Sorry, so like time constraints is another one where we've got people have to be in different areas at different times. So how can we ensure that we get good quality business continuity exercises and ensure that people are tested? This is something we faced a number of times with several of our clients. And what I'd like to do is just to talk through an example of how we've challenged this, and a type of exercise really that we've designed, which is designed to be delivered remotely. So it doesn't have to have the participants in one room, and crucially the facilitator doesn't have to be in the same room as the participants either. So essentially what it is and the challenge really is to fit or use the same amount of time that you would in a traditional tabletop or command post exercise, but spread that over several days. So this is what we came up with as a means of ensuring that we weren't blocking off any more time in people's calendars, but we could get better results by holding a remote exercise. So let me just talk you through what we did there. So hopefully you can see in front of you now how this 3-day exercise runs. So as I said, we would develop it just like any other tabletop exercise really. So you'd have your initial aim and your objectives. Then we develop out a scenario with maybe 3 or 4 different injects. So we wanted to keep the work and the initial work behind the scenes for the planning team the same. So there shouldn't be it's not any more onerous than doing a more traditional tabletop. When you go into a room, there's 10 or 12 people there, and you throw a scenario at them. So what we did was develop the scenario and 3 injects. We had to do a bit of pre-briefing because obviously this was a new model of exercise, so we sent out some joining instructions to the people well in advance. But basically on the first day, and we've done this with several clients, the first time we did it and with subsequent clients as well, what we thought it would be good to do is to test their mass notification systems as well. So if you have a mass notification system that you would use to alert either the wider group or more particularly the IMT or the business continuity team about an incident, then we use that. So we sent out that alert with the WebEx details similar to you'll have had for this webinar, and the outline scenario. So basically just a paragraph outlining what had happened so far. And we sent that out first thing in the morning. I think it was about 8 o'clock. And the exercise didn't start till 10. But what we find is that this buys you a bit of free time really for the business continuity people. Because it allows the business continuity team or the incident management team to start thinking about these issues. So as soon as they read the email, they're going to start thinking about these issues, even if they're maybe on their way to work, they're doing something else in the morning. So it's maybe a bit cheeky, but it buys you a bit of extra thinking time in there. So your team members are already thinking about the issues, and you get a bit of bonus business continuity time in there. So basically at 10 o'clock, everyone joined the WebEx. I ran through a very brief briefing initially just to go over the ground rules for the exercise. And then what we asked was that the team hold their first team meeting based on this scenario. What we try and do with all of our clients, and I'm sure many of you will be the same, is to have a strong process behind how and how the team meets. So when the team gets into the room, they have an agenda that they work through, and that allows them to identify or to understand what's going on with the situation, and to think about some of the key issues, and to develop some exercise or incident objectives rather. We develop those objectives and then work out what we need to actually do. So we get a nice list of actions that get assigned to the different team members, which they can then delegate outwards or downwards as per your incident response structure. So I would say that's a really important part to have that process in place. So all the team did was run through an initial team meeting, and then at the end of that, we basically suspended the exercise. So at this point, there are 2 ways that you can run the rest of it, and we've done both, and we've had some good success in running both these ways. It's just whatever works best for your organization. So after the first team meeting, either you take the list of actions, and they can be emailed over to the exercise facilitator or exercise director. You take the list of actions, and you've already got your scenario inject for the next day. So you do need to spend a bit of time, but you basically generate what the outcome of those actions would be, combine them with the inject for scenario 2, and that forms the basis for the inject that gets sent out the next day. What we did recently with a client was they quite liked the idea of this format, and they didn't want to just have those actions sort of simulated for them, or the outcome of those actions. So after the meeting, in slow time, everyone went back to their day jobs, but they would follow up on some of these actions. So for an example, we ran one recently where there had been some sort of data breach. So there was classified information out there, which had obviously come from the company, but we didn't quite know how it happened. The team in the first meeting had pinned down that it must be from one particular folder. So what they decided to do was to shut down that particular folder so that nobody else could get access to it, and they would limit the impact, hopefully. What then the team went when they left the meeting and went back to their day jobs, they followed up in slow time how quickly that could be done, and if it would cause any sort of unforeseen circumstances. And as it turned out, that particular folder couldn't be shut down without shutting down the whole section. So that was able to be fed back into the next meeting, and it all added to the learning at the end of the session. So basically with this format, you need to decide if you're going to call a definite halt after the first meeting, you simulate the actions and combine them with the next day scenario, or you can let it sort of percolate out in slow time and let people explore these issues. I think with that, you do have to be careful if you're doing it that second way. We had somebody available on an email, on an exercise email, basically, to ask. So the team could ask different questions if things were in or out of the exercise. So for some people that will work if you've got a good bought-in team, you've got good buy-in for business continuity and people want to do it that way. If you're very time pressurized, and as I say, what you can do is call a total halt after the first meeting. You generate the response to the action, combine them with scenario 2. So the next day, the same process follows through. The team get emailed out the next inject. So this just says what's happened basically in the last day. And the beauty of this is that you can more realistically incorporate time jumps into your scenarios. So I know often when we're doing tabletop exercises, we maybe say, right, okay, it's the next day now. So because we want to get into the recovery phase, because I'm sure many of you will know that often if we start doing the exercise, people like doing the incident response stuff, the initial actions, and then maybe you don't even get on to the business continuity question. So this allows you to really push that agenda forward, and it makes it come alive for people. They then hold a second meeting, and the same process is followed through on day 3, the third and final inject, and then we have the WebEx meeting, the third meeting, and at the end of that, everyone stays on the line. So I made that half an hour longer, that meeting, and basically just did a hot wash debrief. So we got the points from all the team members, fed that back into a post-exercise report, and for some of our clients, then we did a more formal follow-up afterwards. So that's basically the format. So as I said, the idea was to keep the time commitment for the business continuity or incident management team participants down to what they were used to. So they were used to doing a 3-4 hour exercise for most of them once, twice a year. So what we could do was make that come alive a bit more whilst still keeping to that time pressure. And as I say, whilst also delivering this remotely. And this has a number of advantages that I just want to reinforce. So, it's more realistic, as we said. Importantly, the team get to practice the dynamic of meeting online. And if that in your plan is an option, and I know it is increasingly for a lot of companies, that they have teams that will be spread across the world potentially. You've got people working from home, you've got a handful of people calling in from the office in Norway, you've got a handful of people from London, you might have one or two, maybe even across different time zones. So this allows you to practice that dynamic of meeting online, which sometimes we're not very good at doing. And interestingly, what a lot of our clients have found is that this is actually easier than doing it in a room, because you have to be more disciplined. So if somebody's talking and you get the discipline in the presentation itself, or you have a team leader who's taking hold of that, then generally the discipline is actually better than it would be in a room where people are, as I'm sure you'll have experience of, cutting across each other or speaking when they shouldn't be, and so on. As I say, we can also test different phases using this model, so we can skip ahead a day in the timeline, and it's more realistic for the people there because it's physically the next day. So I think it just helps bed in these ideas. And obviously, you can skip ahead weeks in advance and so on if that's what you want to do. As I said, it allows you to explore some other areas. So if you're using the method where you're going to let the team go and explore some of these actions when they leave the meeting, then you can find out some really valuable information. So just as we did, where they weren't able to shut down that IT folder as quickly as they thought they might.
Hi, Ewan. Can I interrupt you there?
Yes.
There's just a question come through that kind of you need to answer now. So if you just go on the right-hand side, you should be able to see it on your question panel. That's right.
Sure. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Apologies, Richard. Thanks for sending that question. It's just popped up now. So the team meetings that we held were an hour. So we had a little longer on day one just to hold to have the exercise briefing. So I think it was 10-15 minutes longer. But the team meetings were an hour in length, which reflected what the majority of our clients will do for business continuity incidents. Obviously, if you are working in a more high risk environment, then you're going to have much more of an emergency phase, and you're going to have a lot more people running around and doing things. You're probably going to have more of a command and control structure in place, or command and control style. So for our clients that we've run it, we keep the meetings to 1 hour. So it's, as I said, the time commitment of 3 to 4 hours for a tabletop exercise is kept the same, if you see what I mean. Another thing it helps to do is to mull over some of the issues and slow time a little bit more. So as I said, you're buying yourself more time. People, even though they're in meetings for the same amount of time as they would be for a traditional exercise, they're thinking about the issues in the background. So you, as the business continuity practitioner, business continuity manager, or coordinator, are buying yourself a little more time in people's minds when it comes to that. And I think the other good thing is it gives you 3 practices of working through your process or working through your team meeting. And I just think if you do it over 3 days, then the learning is going to be better. It's going to be more in people's minds than if you do it in 3 or 4 hours. You do 3 meetings back to back based on different different injects in 1 day. So you're spreading that out across the days. So I hope that has answered Mark's initial question, and it's really just something to think about when it comes to exercising. Obviously, as I said, there are going to be some issues with this. The main one being you need to decide if you're generating the responses to those actions, or if you're going to let people go out and think about them in slow time. And I think you'll have a good idea, those of you who do this, your sort of what your company culture is and what's going to fit in well with your working practices. But that's a model that we've used, as I say, to hold remote exercises, which has worked well for us in the past. We're now just going to move on to the next question. I've noted there's another question come in from Vivek, so thanks for that. What we'll do is try to get to that at the end of the session once we've covered the ones that have already come in. So thanks for that. Okay, so our second question comes from Bo. So I drive the BCM program for a major IT outsourcing and consultancy company. The delivery is done by a number of service teams, each responsible for a set of standardized services to a number of clients in parallel. Hence, there is no single team handling a certain site or client, but rather one team doing Unix operations for all clients from a few data centers, for example. A lot of that work is done remotely. Each team has responsibility for their continuity plan. These plans and teams are interdependent and work together. What is your advice for the exercise program for these plans and teams? Well, again, Bo, thanks very much for submitting this question. I just want to sort of paraphrase it or to break it down to make sure I understand. So I hope that this is what you're looking for from it. So understanding of this is that you've got multiple teams which each deliver a single set of services into multiple different clients. And it may be that you have several services delivered to a single client by several different teams. And obviously those teams are interdependent, maybe in terms of their prioritized activities, and they rely on each other and how they deliver work, but also they need to interact with each other. So what I've done on this slide is really just to try and visualize what that looks like, and to talk through the approach that I would take to this, which will hopefully give you some useful ideas to take away. So I think the first thing that's good to do with facing these issues is to take a step or two back and think about at the level from what are the issues and the problems here. So these are the teams that are working together, and these are the services that they have to deliver. And what are the problems that we're going to experience here when we have lots of interdependencies between teams? And I think really there are two main things which spring to mind for me, which are each of the teams truly understanding the impact of incidents if their activities are interdependent. So where interdependencies lie between the teams, do they understand those? And if they don't, then obviously you're going to have issues. And the second point where you might have problems is in communications. So that's in communications between the teams during an incident, and the communication or the message that is going out to the client. And one thing that we've worked with a couple of companies who have similar setups to this in the telecommunications industry, and what we find there is that the challenge is in a single client getting conflicting messages from different teams within an organization, and obviously that does not reflect well on yourselves as an organization. So we thought about the issue and the problems. We then, I would suggest, move on to thinking about what you want to achieve or how do you want to avoid those. And what do we need within those teams to avoid those, and therefore we can think about how we're going to achieve that through exercising. So I think the crucial thing here between the interdependent teams initially is that obviously they have a good understanding of their own plans, and they have an understanding of how their prioritized activities in particular rely on other teams, if that's the case. During an incident, what you're trying to achieve is good situational awareness between those four teams and out to the client. So what we want at any one time is, if I'm in team 1, then my understanding of the incident is the same as someone in team 4. And if we are going to be communicating with the client, that is absolutely vital that we have good situational awareness within the organization. And if we have that good situational awareness, then what we get is consistent messaging. So we avoid that conflicting messaging. So we want consistent rather than conflicting. I think something which, and I'm not sure if this is what you'll have, Bo, when it comes to an incident, is some clients we've worked with previously have a coordinating function for this. So sitting above all these teams, you have a team of incident managers who basically coordinate the overall company response to an incident. So for example, if you have an outage, then the incident manager liaises in with the client, and they also tie together all these teams. So that might be something to think about, is how you achieve that that good coordination in the response, and think about it, whether that's a role, and it may well be already. So just bringing this into some sort of recommendations for an exercise program. So I think the first step is, as I said, to ensure that these teams understand their own plans and understand their own processes. And that might sound fairly obvious, but I think the more discussion-based exercises that you can do within a team, the better the induction process is when somebody joins the team, that business continuity is a part of that, then you're going a long way to ensuring that within the teams, at least, they have a good understanding of their own plan. And if they know their own process as well, then the plan should, it's not too much of a step for them to understand the plan as well. So encourage some discussion-based exercises within the teams. And this does not have to be onerous. It's something that we really drill down into and really emphasize with our clients, is that, hey, if you're holding a team meeting, you hold a weekly team meeting, as we did in my previous role in an incident response center, we held a team meeting once a week anyway, so we tagged on a discussion-based exercise to the start of that for 15 minutes. And it means that people are discussing the issues. They are getting to grips with some of the communications protocols, which are going to be important when you have an incident: who communicates with the client, who communicates between the teams. And it really just keeps it fresh in people's minds. So frequent or little and often, I think, is a good phrase for that. So the more you can get these things in people's heads, even if you're not sitting down for a half day doing it, then so much the better. And obviously the main aim there is to ensure that this is truly part of business as usual, which is, of course, what we're trying to achieve. Next stage, I would say, in an exercise program is to get some discussion-based or maybe tabletop exercises between the teams. So get different members of these teams around the table and drill into that communication aspect in particular. Do they understand the communication protocols during an incident between teams and outwards to the client? And get them to think about how they can avoid some of these problems that we've identified. Because they will know how they work on a day-to-day basis. They know how their interactions would work instinctively, really, during normal operations, but also chances are during an incident as well. So get them to discuss that. What we've done a number of times is to, just as a short exercise, when you've got the guys around the table together, is to drop some process maps for within their team. So almost like an end-to-end process. So if a request comes in, whether it's from a client or from within the business, how that's processed, all the different activities, and how it's fed back to the client. And then get them to think about, if you get them to put the activities in a box and line them all up together with arrows, and then we can think about where those interdependencies are. So get them to draw lines into where they rely on information from other teams at different stages of that process. And what that does is really just helps to visualize what that looks like, and again helps them to think what are some of the problems they're going to have and how those communication protocols are going to play out. And I think finally, for an exercise program, if we're building this up, and appreciate, though, that sometimes we don't have as much time as we would like with the different teams when we're running these business excuse me, when we're running these business continuity exercises. But the next stage, I would say, is to hold some command post exercises featuring different combinations of the teams. And what I would do is have them in different rooms. I'm presuming for the main part they are going to communicate either by telephone or through some sort of instant messaging during an incident, or by email. So set up those conditions, and as we said in the first question, you want to practice the conditions. You don't want to have some sort of false exercise world where we're practicing something and we get very good at that, and then suddenly we go back to the day job, something happens for real, and the incident conditions are totally different from the exercise conditions. So obviously we want to make sure that this is as realistic as possible. So I would say pick 2 teams and who have particular interdependencies that you've identified, and I'm sure you'll have picked these up already in your business impact analysis. What you want to do is to get them into 2 different rooms, and then we can start again with a basic scenario. And what I would do is feed in that same information separately, but at the same time to these 2 different teams. And what you then want to do is you'll need 2 people to facilitate it. But what you want to do is to monitor what happens to that information when it goes into those teams. So how is the situational awareness? Do they take the situation? Do they understand it? And what do they do with it? So how do they share it with the other teams that they have interdependencies with? And what that is really useful is it'll show you where your comms protocols are going to fall down. Because if they're not as tight as they need to be yet, then what you'll find is the story will grow arms and legs in team 2. Team 3 might go down a totally different route, and you can start putting in injects into team 2 that maybe team 3 don't get. And you can see how long it takes for those stories to align and for that information to be passed between the teams, if that's something that they need to do. And obviously, then you can, if you're doing it more as a sort of live exercise or a simulated command post exercise, then you can have some role players who they would call out to as the client as well, just to close that loop. So that's some ideas for an exercise program. So as I said, discussion based exercises, little and often, really get that business continuity plan and interdependencies in people's heads as part of business as usual. And that is really going to get the buy-in from your team leads there to make sure that they're doing that as part of maybe their weekly meetings or whatever they can throw it in. And I think 10, 15 minutes even in someone's head, if you're doing it often, is a lot better than even doing a couple of hours of exercise once a year. I think you will win a little more hearts and minds if you do it that way. Then, as I said, discussion-based exercises between the teams, maybe drop some process maps that can help you visualize those interactions and make them really come alive for people. And then a command post exercise, which you're featuring at least 2 different teams. And obviously, as you build up in complexity, then we can test the interdependencies between different teams as we go on. What I haven't really touched on there is that link to the clients, and what I'm presuming you'll have for a business continuity incident is some sort of coordinating function, whether it's a business continuity team at a tactical or a strategic level, who would develop some kind of message that's being packaged up and going out to the client regarding the incident rather than the technical issues, which is what our teams here are dealing with. So thanks for that question, Bo, and again, I hope that it has been useful for you. I've got another here, and then I'll hopefully come on to you and Vivek there about cyber exercises. So, in my organization, this has come from Felicity in Birmingham, in my organization, we write objectives for all of our desktop exercises, but there is no real methodology for this, and they are done on gut feel. Do you have any best practice tips for writing good objectives? Well, thanks again for this. I think this is a common problem, to be honest. It's something we have come up across a lot. And sometimes I think we are guilty as business continuity practitioners of not focusing enough on our objectives. no offense if that does not apply to you. I'm sure there's somebody out there who have very good objectives. So we find that often they can become an afterthought. So if we've gone in and, as we have several times, to do a gap analysis of business continuity within an organization, one thing we'll look for, or even an audit, one thing we'll look for is you come across the same exercise year on year. The scenario might even be the same, but even if the scenario has been varied, then the objectives are usually the same, and they're usually very woolly, and it's something like test the plan to make sure it's right, test the team to make sure they know what they're doing, and identify any issues, something like that. So, which is not great. So what we need to do is to ensure that we've got good objectives, because they're important. What they allow us to do is, for the business continuity manager or practitioner, is to drill into different issues. And this is something you should really be doing as your business continuity management system and exercise program matures. You need to really be focusing in on problem areas. And it obviously allows us to demonstrate that we're testing different areas with our exercise program as well. So whether we're focusing on people, whether focusing on plans, it might be processes within teams, which might relate back to our previous question from Bo, or we can use it even as problem solving. So we can be aware of an issue, and as part of the exercise, what we want to do is to identify how we might solve that. So I'll come on to the next slide now, and really I'm just going to talk through how we at Plan B Consulting develop objectives, and this is based on, or it's quite similar to what I've done in previous roles as well. And it's just really a nice, easy methodology to make sure that our objectives are good quality. Before we go into this, obviously every exercise has to have an overall aim as well. So usually I keep the aim as a fairly general statement of what you're trying to achieve, and it wraps up all of these different objectives that you want to look at. But it's just a nice, easy headline. But when we want to go into the objectives, as I say, we want to make it clear the different things that we are focusing on. So the first question is that, and these are questions that I think need to be as part of an objective. So who? So who is it that is being tested? What teams are involved? Is it your business continuity or incident management team? Is it at operational, tactical, or strategic level? Or maybe you're getting, as you get more mature, you want to drill into different individual roles and responsibilities, and you want to have an objective linked to how the communications role plays out to deal with reputational issues based on a certain scenario. So who is the first thing that an objective needs. Secondly, we need what. So what activity is it that you're testing? Fairly self-explanatory there. So is it that you want to see just generally how they manage the incident? Do you want to go into how they, or their familiarity with, or how they use their RTOs from the plan? Do you want to look on comms and how they understand the links with their interested parties? So what is it that you are looking for from the people who are involved? What are the conditions? So what generally is, I suppose, is the incident? We would normally put in the impact rather than the scenario here. So because we don't want to give your participants too much of a helping hand, particularly if they've seen these in advance. But what I would say is that we want to test, for example, the tactical business continuity team in how they deal with communications in a loss of premises incident. So you're very high level, you're talking about what the impact is there. So what are the conditions? And we'll look at an example of this afterwards. excuse me. And then finally to what standard? So, and this is one that we find is very often missed out of objectives, and it's quite important to have in there, because if you as an exercise director or umpire or facilitator, if you're trying to assess how teams are doing, then to what standard is going to be quite important, actually. So is it in accordance with our business continuity plan, which pulls it back into that? Is it with some sort of best practice? Do you have some sort of written guidelines or protocols down there? So it's always best to have a standard in there. And excuse me, another thing I do when we've written an objective is really just give it a test. And in the same way where those of you who are maybe write objectives, you know, these often come up in your HR, your annual review, you write your SMART objectives, and you can test to see if they're smart. This is really what I do here. So do we have the who, the what, the conditions, and the standard? And I'd say that's something that you can do to test out if your objectives are good. Then we've got there just a point on some key words, because I know sometimes we can struggle a bit with how to phrase these. So words like analyze or examine, obviously if that's what you're trying to achieve, it might be, as I said, that you're almost using this as a problem-solving exercise. You want to use the exercise as that. So we're maybe trying to identify gaps in a plan. So it might be a new plan. We want to identify any gaps. Or we've got a new business process and we want to identify the different problem areas that are involved in that. It might be that we want to validate, so we're either validating a plan or we're validating processes, or even validating we've got the right people on that team as well, which is important. And finally, assess. So assess can be a bit of a loaded term, and for those of you who, and I know many people won't be as mature in their organizations, or there's not the need or the sort of appetite for it to have detailed role descriptions within the team, but with competencies that sit behind that. It's something in my previous role we did a lot of work on, is developing a competency standard, so that we knew that everyone in the team had the same level of training, the same level of qualifications. Now obviously that in that instance they were doing that as a full-time job, so it's essentially, so it's what you would expect. But think about that, and particularly those of you who've got quite mature, is I think there's sometimes a bit of a reluctance to look at individuals, but it can be really valuable to do that, to say, right, actually, is what we do for communication management, is what we do for HR good? Do we have a standard that we can level that against? So something to consider there. And as I say, what I do with this is essentially just give it a little test. So here's an example for you. It's a little bit technicolor, so apologies for that, and sincere apologies to anyone who struggles with differentiating between colours. I know I have a friend who would not like this at all, so I just couldn't think of any other way to do it. So here's the who, the what, the conditions, and the standard. So the who in red there. So I'll read the objective first. We examine the extent to which individual departments can communicate and collaborate effectively and in accordance with the communications protocols when faced with a loss of IT incident. So you can see there, we have got the bulk of the thing, but we can dive into, we've got a who, so it's individual departments. So this one might work for Bo's question previously. We've got a what, so they can communicate and collaborate effectively. So we're testing their ability to communicate with each other. What are the conditions? It's a loss of IT incident, so a total loss of IT. And there's the standard in there. So what standard is in accordance with the communications protocols. So, and obviously you see you sort of shuffle these around, and you can make it wordy, and you can play around with it till your heart's content. But basically, for me, a good exercise objective, contains those 4 different elements to it, at least. And an important point with this that I'd just like to make when it comes to objectives is, I think it's best practice to not have too many objectives. It's something we see a lot, and people do them in-house, is that, there's sort of 10, 12 objectives linked to the aim. So your overall aim is to test the business continuity team and see how they respond to an incident. And then you've got 12 different objectives that all come to sort of stream out of that. I think you lose the benefit there, because you lose the focus. So people within the team lose the focus of what it is that you're particularly wanting to look at. And to be frank, you're never going to cover them all off anyway. So what we usually do is maybe 3 different objectives linked to each exercise that we run, and we sit down in advance with the client and work that through with them, what they're trying to achieve. So we think about who, the what, the conditions, and the standard, and we get a basic scenario idea, and then we work out what areas we want to go into. How we do that, and this is another important thing with objectives, I think sometimes they're just plucked slightly from the air, and we go, yeah, we've got a plan, let's test the plan. We've got the team, let's test the team. What I think is best practice is to go back and look at your previous post-exercise reports. And I know some of you will do this already, but in the same way that if you were going in and conducting an audit somewhere, you would ask for evidence, and you would look at the previous audit report, and you would see what came up in the audit report, and then you would deal with it and make sure that is really focused in on in this audit, to make sure that they've done something about it. So I think that's good practice with your post-exercise reports as well. Look at your previous one. Sometimes I think we're all guilty. We come up with the nice recommendations, we put them in the report, they go into our quality management system or whatever it might be within your organization, and they get followed through, and we trust they get followed through, and we never sort of go back to it. I think the final part really of follow-up is if there's been something that's been a real issue in a previous exercise, to make sure that you validate the fix that you've put in place. So you might say, yeah, we had that recommendation, we've identified what needed to be done, and we did it, but then in the next exercise, you want to test that to make sure that that's actually worked and that the same problem doesn't come up again. So look at your previous recommendations and feed those into feed those into your thinking for your next exercise as well.
Hi,
okay.
Ewan.
So I hope. Hi there.
I was just gonna say we've just got a couple more minutes before we finish off, and I was just wondering whether anyone else had any questions that they might want to get to you just before we wrap up. So if anyone has any questions, they might want to do them now. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. We've had this one that's coming from Vivek, which I mentioned earlier, which is, what is the way ahead to conduct cybersecurity incident scenario exercises? What are the things it needs to include, and how it needs to be planned? So there's quite a few things in there, Vivek. As Lachlan said, we don't have too long, but what I'd say with this is, with your cybersecurity exercises, really what you want to do is to think about the wider business impact as well. So from a business continuity perspective, yes, we need to think about how the IT department are going to deal with the incident, but we need to think about the wider business impact within the business continuity team. So I think the key to running one of these is to not make it too technical. And often we pre-brief the IT department, or even get the IT department sometimes involved in the planning or elements of them. And then we have someone else from the IT department actually in the team to run the exercise who hasn't been involved in the planning. And basically, with what we're trying to do is to not get bogged down in the technical detail. So we want to keep it fairly high level for business continuity purposes, and we're testing the team in all of the things that come along with a cybersecurity incident. Because your IT department, whoever it is that deals with that, is going to be dealing with the problem. But you need to be thinking about the fallout from that. And you saw it in the UK, certainly. We saw it just a week or two ago with the NHS ransomware incident, where it's just a huge reputational issue. And you don't underestimate the importance of your communications in that. So I think the key really for these is to not go down into the weeds, if you like, into the detail of the cyber issue, and try and make sure that your business continuity focuses on very much on the business impact as well. So we won't be able to get into all the things you mentioned, Vivek, but I'm happy to follow up that with you afterwards. So that's really us coming to the end of the session now. I see there's been no other comments in. Just some final points to wrap up, and I'll hand back to Lachlan just to say cheerio. So just things to highlight, I think, is listen to your business. So if the culture doesn't, if in the business culture you don't usually sit down for 4-hour meetings, then getting people to sit down for a 4-hour exercise is going to be difficult. So listen to the business, go with the business culture. As I said in the first question, we can think about spreading our exercise across several days. We can have lots of smaller exercises to help emphasize that. Secondly, practice what's real for you. So practice the process. As I've said a couple of times as we've gone through this, what you want to avoid is your exercise situation and the real live incident situation being different. So practice the detail. Otherwise, you'll have people, and I'm sure some of you might have been the same coming onto this, you'll faff around forever practicing or getting people to log on to a system right at the start, and less time focusing on managing the incident. Third is to be creative. So use that horrible phrase, think outside the box, and which we tried to do with that 3-day exercise, which was, as I say, just using the same time commitment as we usually do for a 3 or 4 hour exercise from our participants. And the final thought there, exercise little and often if this is a problem for you. So if you can tag it on to the start of a meeting, in many industries we're good at doing that in sort of health and safety. We have a health and safety moment at the start of a meeting, which is great. But think about how we can do that with a business continuity mindset as well. Can we have a little scenario up on the wall on a slide, and we'll just talk through it? And the more you can get these issues in people's minds, then the better prepared they are going to be, as well as obviously practicing the process, which I said is really important within your team itself. So practice that process with tabletop and command post exercises where you can. So thanks very much, folks. That's been our time. So I hope that's been useful for you, and I'll just hand back to Lachlan to wrap up.
Ewan, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I think we've all got an informative insight into BCM exercises. And you managed to cover all the questions, which is brilliant. Thank you to all those that attended, listened in, asked questions, took an hour out of your day to listen in, which is great. We'll be sending out a copy of the webinar as today's bulletin later on, in case you missed out on some of the webinar. If you've got any feedback, just reply to any of the emails that you receive from us, and we'll take action as necessary. The next webinar will be on Friday, 30th June, 11 a.m. The expert will be announced. I was hoping to announce the expert now, but we'll announce it hopefully next week. In the meantime, thank you for joining us, and if you're in the UK, we hope you enjoy the sunny weather. Thank you.